5. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I see people joining. Thank you for being prompt. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're coming together tonight for the finale of our Fall Holy Day season, our annual Simchat Torah celebration. This is a Simchat Torah celebration such that we have never seen before. Of course, this evening the sanctuary is quiet, especially compared to our Simchat Torah celebrations when we have the bima in the middle of our sanctuary and we bring out our Torah scrolls and we're doing hakafot, circuits around the bima, and when we're all dancing, and it's just a different environment where everything that we've experienced during this season is sort of being released in expressions of joy and energy. And yes, we certainly all do miss that, and we look forward to getting back to that type of Simchat Torah celebration. But this evening, something new and something different, something somewhat unique for us. And I hope that it will be enjoyable. I hope it will be informative. I hope it'll be spiritually edifying and enriching. And I hope it will be memorable for us. We're doing something for the first time. And what we've done is we have unrolled our 2 Torah scrolls, each to a different book of the Torah. Of course, the Torah contains the first 5 books, the books of Moses, the Chumash, which means 5. The first book is Genesis, and you see on one screen that is named Bereshit Genesis, the whole of the book of Genesis there unrolled before you. And then after some introductory matters here, you'll see on this screen where you're seeing me now, the whole of the book of Deuteronomy unrolled on our other scroll. There'll be one more camera when we come to explaining different parts of the scroll that will have a close-up on the parts or the section or the letters that we're speaking about. And for those of you who are relatively new to Zoom, just know that if you hover over one of those screens, you can at any time pin a particular screen. So if you want to take a closer look at Genesis, then you can pin that screen that says Bereshit Genesis. You can do the same thing with Deuteronomy once you're seeing the book of Deuteronomy on this screen, or of course, the close-up view that's going to be following as we're talking about the different parts of the Torah. I'd like to begin this evening by just reading once again the scripture that has been guiding us during this whole Holy Day season. It's a part of the Haftorah, a Haftorah reading for Yom Kippur. It's from Isaiah chapter 57, verse 15. And it says this: "For thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy places, and also with the one who is of contrite and lowly spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the contrite." We've sought during this season to focus on God and God's transcendence and God's majesty, to focus on God's immanence and God's accompaniment, to speak about God as the one who revives those who are lowly and who uplifts those who are contrite of heart. Lord, this evening, thank you for the opportunity to take a new and a fresh angle on our Torah scrolls here at Sha'arei Shalom. We're grateful to you that your Torah is central. Lord, your instruction, all it means, all to which it points us. Lord, we pray this evening that as we take a closer look and a different look, that we might find information that's a blessing, Lord, that's a joy. And thank you for the gift of your word, and thank you that here in our synagogue we can be edified week in and week out, reading from it, and specifically reading from the scrolls, as our people have done for generations and generations. May tonight be a blessing to you and for each one. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. I'm going to invite Ben Wiseman to come and give a little bit further introduction for us and some explanation and teaching on the Torah scroll itself.
Well, Chag Sameach, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me through this face shield here. It's a different experience. Well, hopefully most of you were with us earlier today when we were talking about Shemini Atzeret. Often, for most of the holidays, in the diaspora, there's a tradition to add a second day to the holiday. So right now we're going from Shemini Atzeret to Simchat Torah, which is kind of the extra day of Shemini Atzeret. In Israel, they do both on the same day, although sometimes they will gather on the next night, even though it's not a holiday in Israel, just to kind of dance with the Torah in solidarity with the whole Jewish world. But anyway, this is this second day, which is dedicated to celebrating the kind of reset of the Torah reading cycle, and it's a very joyous occasion and one that focuses in specifically on the Torah scroll, or the Sefer Torah. So Sefer means book in Hebrew, although in this case we're specifically talking about a scroll. And I guess if you look in some of the other camera angles, you can see some Torah scrolls. And I just wanted to talk about what goes into making a Torah scroll, and maybe we'll first talk about who makes a Torah scroll. So the person who makes a Torah scroll is called a sofer, or a scribe. You see a lot in the New Testament, it talks about the scribes, and so this is kind of, it's a type of craftsman. There's kind of a guild of sofrim, and they take an apprenticeship, they learn how to write a Torah scroll, these days probably get a certification, and it's kind of something that's passed down from generation to generation, all of the specific rules and and methods, excuse me, and different customs related to writing a Torah scroll. Now, traditionally, a sofer would always be a religious Jewish man. More recently, in progressive Jewish circles, there are some female scribes, and even, from what I hear, some Orthodox Jewish women who are kind of secretly learning the trade. So there's this long line of individuals who have been writing the Torah based always on a previous Torah scroll. And the word sofer actually comes from the Hebrew root related to counting. So it's actually because they're counting each individual letter and checking it and making sure that it exactly matches the scroll that they're basing it off of. So that's the person who's writing a scroll, and they use very specific tools. The Torah is written on the prepared skin of a kosher animal. Technically, it could be any kosher animal, although some have a little bit more space to write than others. So most of the time today we're talking about cattle, but it could also be written on goat skin or on deer skin. And usually the most of the scrolls, and especially the Ashkenazi scrolls, have parchment, which is thinner and light in color. It's part of the skin that's been separated. Whereas sometimes when you see a Sephardic or Mizrahi scroll, it's a thicker leather, and it's maybe more of a brown orange color. So that's what we're writing on, is these prepared sheets. And the parchment in Hebrew, it's called cloth. So you're going to have maybe 3 to 5 columns of the Torah on each of these pieces. And depending on how they do it, maybe each piece is written separately and then sewed together at the end to make a Torah scroll. Now, each of these columns, there's rules about how to do everything. So the parchment is scored with a reed, and there are 42 lines in each column. And then an ink is prepared in small batches from an oak gall, which is interesting in itself. It's actually when a wasp lays eggs on an oak tree, it balloons up in this allergic reaction, and then the wasp leaves its little incubation chamber, and they end up crushing these up and turning them into ink for a Torah scroll. So it's a natural ink. And you can either write with a reed or a feather. These days, usually it's a turkey feather. So each scribe, they have to get the feather and cut it the way they like it and dip it in the ink. And, you're writing one letter at a time and trying to make everything just like you see on the previous scroll. Or you might have a book called a tikkun. We have one over here that is copied from a scroll, but it's just in a book form for reference. So let me see what else I've got here in my notes that we can talk about. So a modern scribe is called a sofer stam, and stam is an acronym. It stands for Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzah. So scribes who are trained, they're usually trained to be able to write a mezuzah, be able to make tefillin, and to be able to write a Torah scroll. The other main ritual thing that is written by a sofer would be a Megillat Esther, a scroll of Esther, to be read on Purim. Let me see what else we've got here. I think Seth is going to talk a little bit more about some of the scribal conventions and everything. But I did want to mention, and we'll see it more in detail in a minute, that there are certain letters that have tagin or crowns on them. And that's one of the special things that you'll see in this script that the Torah scrolls are written on. There's slight variations between Ashkenazi or Sephardi or different traditions, but they're all going to be this same script called Asherit, because that's taken from the place name. This is a script from Babylon. So actually, originally, if you think about the tablets of the Ten Commandments or some of the earlier writings, they would have been written in this Paleo-Hebrew script that's related to ancient Phoenician, and that would be one script. So it's the same words, just different shaped letters. And so the script we have now dates back to the exile in Babylon. All right, let me see just a couple more things here. Another thing that a sofer might write would be a ketubah, a Jewish marriage contract. So with the Torah, every letter has to be in the right place, in the right column, and it's very exact. But a ketubah is one of the places where maybe a scribe gets to have a little more fun and create a work of art. And you see many beautiful ketubot created by scribes. All right, well, that's most of what I have as far as just an orientation to the Torah scroll. Oh, I guess I should also mention, we talked about the sheets of cloth or parchment. They're tied together with gitin, which is made from the thread made from the sinews of the animal. And then those sheets are put together in a scroll, and at least in the Ashkenazi tradition, they are tied onto etzei chaim, or trees of life, which are the wooden rollers. In like Sephardi or Mizrahi tradition, sometimes they have something called a teak, which is a rigid container that the scroll's in, and you can actually, it stands upright and you can open it up and read off of it. But at our congregation, we have etzei chaim, and then we have these, a little velvet belt for it, a velvet cover, and we also have finials or rimonim. Well, I guess you can't quite see it in the background here, but those are the silver decorations that fit on top of the etzei chaim, on top of the handles. And some congregations may have ones where it's a crown that fits over both handles, maybe a breastplate, different decorations. But these are all just ways to honor God's word and bring beauty to what's really important about the scroll, which is about reading God's word and hearing from him through the scroll. Everything else is just kind of decoration. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rabbi Seth, and I will say Moedim lesimcha, which means festivals for joy. And even though we're apart, I hope that you all have a joyful Simchat Torah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ben. Maybe at the end, if we have time, we thought we may open it up for some Q&A if people are interested. But what we'll be doing now as we move to the scroll is really being able to illustrate a number of the things that Ben just shared, and you'll be able to see for yourself some of the different elements that he described. So as give me one moment, I'm going to turn this camera off and then turn it so that it's focused well on the scroll of Deuteronomy. And I will meet you in just a few seconds at the very beginning of the book of Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. And here we are. So let me just say a word about this scroll that we're looking at. This is what we refer to affectionately at Sha'arei as our small scroll, and it comes in handy for Hagbah when we lift the scroll and we haven't been working out and doing our regular exercises. It's lighter. Usually a Sefer Torah would be in the realm of about 18 inches, that is from the top to the bottom, measuring this way, and this one's around 18 inches to around 22 inches. And our other scroll, what we call our large scroll, is approximately a 22-inch scroll. Ben mentioned the Eitz Chaim, the rollers and the handles, and you see here singular Eitz Chaim, plural Eitzei Chaim. But here you see an Eitz Chaim roller, a wooden handle. And of course, what you're seeing here that I'm holding in my hand is also called a hand, called a yad, just the Hebrew word for hand. And this is what is used traditionally by the Torah reader to follow along so that the reader's eyes don't skip to the wrong word or to the wrong line. As you can see, it's literally a hand at the end, a right hand with the finger pointing there, and that helps you to keep precisely on the spot where you're reading. So here we have the very beginning of the book of Deuteronomy. You know that you've come to a new book of the Torah when you see 4 blank lines to give a good distance and to mark off a new book. And here, Deuteronomy starts with the words Ele Devarim. These are the words. in Hebrew and Jewish tradition, Deuteronomy is called Devarim, literally words, named after the second word of the parasha. In English, Deuteronomy comes more from the Latin and the Greek, like second law, because it's Moses's sort of recitation or reviewing of the Torah itself. So here is the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy. So we're just going to move down, and you have a chance to take a look at the columns. And you see here a one sheet of parchment. As Ben said, it's traditional to have 3 to 5 columns. 3, to my knowledge, the most traditional. And so you see column 1, column 2, and column 3. And you see how you have sewn together here and sewn together here this particular sheet. And so 3 columns throughout most of this particular scroll. Now this scroll we acquired when we took our tour in, I believe, the year 2017, when Sha'arei did our second tour there. And this was purchased in Mea Sha'arim, directly from a sofer, from a scribe, who works on restoring Torah scrolls. We know very little about the history of this scroll before we acquired it. Between my understanding the sofer in Hebrew, what I understood is that the scroll was around 100 years old when we purchased it, and that it was rescued out of the European Holocaust, and then it was heavily damaged, and then it was restored by the use of other scrolls that had also been damaged. And that's one common way to get a Torah scroll. If one is not commissioned to be written anew, oftentimes scrolls that are heavily damaged and therefore invalid, but have sections that are valid, can be pieced together with the different pages of the parchment to form a full Torah scroll. And so sometimes, and you'll see here at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, you'll see a different scribal hand. Just like we have different handwriting in English, different scribes will have different sort of signatures and characteristics. Of course, very similar, but those who are well versed can tell a different scribal hand and maybe a different style on a crown or a flourish. Let's move here to Deuteronomy chapter 6. We're in a very familiar passage, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. And if you have taken even Hebrew blast off, you'll see the letters Shin, Mem, Ayin. It means Shema, as in hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, or the Lord is one. And here you see the word Echad, Aleph, Chet, Daled. And you may notice a couple of letters that stand out to you in this first verse of the Shema. The letter Ayin, the last letter of the first word, Shema, and the letter Daled, the last letter of the last word of the first verse, Echad. And this accomplishes a few things. One is it makes very clear when you've come to the Shema, the central declaration of the Torah, of Judaism, of our faith, what Yeshua calls the foremost commandment. So you see it clearly there. And secondly, the letter Ayin and the letter Daled, those two letters together form the word Ed, which means in Hebrew witness. So every time we declare the Shema, we're a witness to God's oneness. There's another reason why these two letters are written are enlarged here, And that is because in another part of the Torah that we don't have open for you this evening, in Exodus chapter 34, verse 14, there is a phrase that says, there is no other God. And in that phrase, you have the word for other starts with an aleph, which is a silent letter, like the letter ayin, and then the word other ends with the letter resh, which looks a lot like a dalet. And so one of the reasons that the ayin and the dalet are enlarged in the Shema is so that we remember we're saying God is one, and we're not confusing the word echad with the word acher, which means other. We're talking about the one God of Israel and God of the universe, not another God. So that's the Shema, and for those of you who, again, are familiar with Hebrew, you'll recognize here that it continues, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavecha ubechol nafshecha ubechol meodecha vehayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi nitzavecha hayom al levavecha vishinanta am levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha avadere uvshochbecha uvkumecha. And it continues, but you get the idea. And I hope you've been able to follow along a little bit, and you see how the yod really helps when the words are small and when they're close together and when they're justified in this manner. That's the Shema. We're going to move down a ways now through the book of Deuteronomy, and you can just watch as the columns go by, and you'll see the breaks in the sheets of the parchment, and you see how you have 3 columns in each sheet there. And now we're going to make our way to the very end of the book. And at the very end of the book, we have, as you'll notice, 2 columns here that are looking much different from the other columns. These thin columns here on this and over here as well. And by the way, you can see where the parchment changes and where the scribal handwriting changes from this piece of parchment to this piece of parchment. Well, we're at the very end of the book of Deuteronomy, and specifically we're at the Song of Moses. There are a few portions in the Torah scroll that are highlighted and seen to have a special significance and import and deserve special treatment by the hand of the scribe. One of those is in the book of Exodus, so we don't have it open today, and we can pan out to the whole of the Song at the Sea. We don't have it open today, but the Song at the Sea is written in a special kind of formation. And here also the Song of Moses. It's a prophetic song. It speaks of Israel's future. If we were to count, we would count 70 lines, which is, of course, a number of wholeness and a number of completion. And it has this open space in the middle. It's a poem, and so the meter works beautifully in Hebrew. And one of the reasons for writing it in 2 divisions like this is because the meter corresponds from one line to the next line, to the next line, to the next line, and so forth. And so it's written for emphasis of the poetic meter. We come now to the very end. Deuteronomy chapters 33 and 34 are the parasha Vizot HaBracha, and this is the blessing as Moses gives prior to his death. And let me just read from the last chapter of the book of Deuteronomy in English so that we continue our tradition of reading the end of the scroll on Simchat Torah and starting anew in Genesis. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho, and the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negev and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there." So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. When the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended, and Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hand on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, none like him for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh, and to all his servants and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. And there we have the close of the book of Deuteronomy. We're going to move immediately and without pause to our second scroll and to the very beginning of the book of Genesis. You will see here the word, the first word of the Torah, and the name that we call the book of Genesis, Bereshit. And you see that it's traditional to write the bet larger than other letters. In fact, in this scroll, the whole word Bereshit is written a little larger than the other letters, and then the bet even standing out in this first letter. It's a way of highlighting this letter as the first letter of the Torah, as significant, the first word of the Torah, something special here. We are beginning, and we'll see another example or two of large letters that are enlarged for different reasons or purposes. In the Torah scroll, we have some large letters. We have some letters that are written smaller. We have in the Torah scroll some letters with dots over them, and we'll show you just a few examples of those in just a moment. The Torah begins like this: Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. This is a nice column for us to take a close look at some of the crowns on the letters. These crowns are decorative. They serve to beautify the script and beautify the scroll and bring art together with, of course, the literature and the power of the Word of God. And so you can see better in this scroll because of the larger print and the better condition parchment itself, some of the crowns there on the letters. I'll also point out that here we have an example of a small letter. So here we're in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. And you see this word, which is Behibaram, right here. And do you see that the second letter, the He, is smaller than the letters around it? This verse, this part of the verse in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, says, "These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created." And that's this word, when they were created. Well, in this second part of Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, it marks another perspective on creation. At first, in chapter 1, verse 1 through 2, 4, the first part, we have the different days of creation and that very orderly, organized, poetic expression of creation. And then when we come to verse 2, 4b, it kind of hones in on the creation of humanity, Adam and the animals and Eve. And then we have, of course, the story of the serpent in the garden and all of that. And it's this part of the verse that marks that transition to the next part of the creation story. Oftentimes, when you see a letter that's large or that's small, it means there's been a good amount of discussion or debate or interpretation surrounding that particular word or that particular part of the Torah. And there's one perspective on this He, that as we're talking about creation and moving toward the part of the account which will include the serpent, that the world that God has created is in some ways like this letter He, where it has it's closed on three sides, but there is an opportunity to go astray. That it is possible to make decisions that go in the direction of wrongdoing and of evil, and that open part of the He, sort of where one can fall out, is an illustration of that, and an admonition for us to choose to remain there inside of the He, in the good world that God has created. We're going to make our way down the book of Genesis, and I'll just note a couple of other points of interest in our journey through the scroll. We can pause here just to note something that you may or may not have noticed, and even those who read the Torah in our community, that oftentimes when we have what I would describe as the equivalent of like a paragraph break in English, you see a line ends and then kind of a new section begins. Not every time, but almost every time that new section starts with the letter Vav. So here's an example. Letter Vav here begins this section. Let's move up to the next section, and we start with a Vav, Vayehi. And then let's move down till we come to the next break, and we have a Vav, Vayehi. And let's go down again, and we have a Vav, Vayihyu. And we're gonna move now up to the next section. We have a Vav, Vahashem. And we will go down a little bit more. And as you're seeing, each of these new sections is beginning with Vav, with Vav, with Vav. Why is that? Well, it was noted that in Exodus chapter 27, verse 10, in the description of the building of the Mishkan, or the tabernacle, the curtains were hung from hooks. And the phrase there that describes the curtains being hung from hooks is vave ha'amudim. The word for hook is vav. So vave ha'amudim means hooks of the columns. And so it became customary that every time a new column, or we might say section, here began, that it would start with the letter vav to kind of commemorate or remember that passage in Exodus chapter 27, verse 10, that even in the Torah scroll, just like in the Mishkan or the tabernacle, every column should be hung, so to speak, from the letter Vav. And so that's what you have for the most part, not 100% of the time, but pretty close to 100% of the time with each of the new sections in the Torah. We're making our way closer to the end of Genesis, but you see how this, of our larger scrolls, by the way, we acquired this scroll in the year 2001. It was our first scroll as a community. We purchased it from someone in Jerusalem, and of course it was shipped here to North Carolina. Its history, we were also told at the time, is that it was 90 to 100 years old, and that it had come out of Hungary and made its way to Israel. And you see that this scroll has much more of the work of one hand, one scribal hand, so it was a lot less damaged than the other. And yet here's an example of a place where there had been damage and it was repaired and restored, and you see that the words that had been either smudged or had faded out, or there was a problem there, were rewritten on another piece of parchment, and you see how it's been cut out here, and then it's been stuck there and restored, so that you see the words that were there. Here's an example of a phenomenon that we have a few times in the Torah scroll, and that is we have dots over each of the letters of this word here. Here we're in the account of Jacob on his way to encounter Esau, and you'll remember this is the wrestling match with the angel, and Jacob's concern over meeting his brother Esau. And when they do meet, this is Genesis chapter 33, verse 4. And referring to Esau, it says, Vayishakehu, and it's usually translated, and Esau kissed Jacob. But there's some possible other meanings of this word, namely, it could theoretically also be translated to bite rather than to kiss. And so there's quite a bit of discussion among the commentators of what this word is meaning and what this word is implying. Some commentators saying, well, it does mean that he kissed Jacob, but not with his whole heart. And of course, it's a very tense and emotional moment. And this is simply marked and maybe with some uncertainty there in terms of what exactly is going on in the scribal and interpretive tradition. The scribe marks this word, as well as a number of others within the scroll itself, with dots on top. Okay, well, we can just kind of go down to the end and get a picture of the whole of the book of Genesis. This is 5 of our folding tables, end to end. The original idea was, could we get an entire scroll completely unrolled, all 5 books? But we have to have a larger sanctuary for that. It would be around 125 feet, give or take, to have the entire scroll unrolled before us here. I'll say one other thing, and then we'll move back to the podium, and if you have any questions about anything we've discussed or anything we haven't discussed, we'd love to talk about them, and if we can answer them, great, and if not, we could find some answers. But I just wanted to mention too that you'll also notice that all of the lines are justified, and the way that that's done in the scribal tradition is by elongating certain letters. So a resh would be an example of a letter that is one that's often elongated. It's not significant other than to get the line to justification. Here's another example of a resh that's elongated to bring to the end. And then you have other examples. For example, a tav is often elongated. A lamed is often elongated. And there are a couple other letters like mem and that I'm not seeing right now. But here would be an example at the very end of the book of Genesis, elongated tav, elongated resh, elongated resh, and the end of Genesis starts B'Mitzrayim, in Egypt. And then, of course, now we move, 4-line break, and we move to the beginning of the book of Exodus. Well, I'm gonna move back to the podium camera, and if you wanted to begin putting any questions in the chat, go ahead and do that, and we'll try to field those. And if not, that's fine too, as we come closer to the finalizing or completing our season. And we are back. And so I'm going to pull up the chat here, and while I readjust my face shield, I'm going to see if Ben would take a look there. And
All right, well, let me see what we've got here. I did want to mention Rabbi Seth was talking about the column starting with a Vav, and I was learning a little bit about this week, and it wasn't always that way. In fact, when some scribes who wanted to be fancy started starting each column with a Vav, it was very frowned upon, and some rabbis tried to stop it, but they weren't successful, and now most scrolls are Vav scrolls where they start with a Vav. So anyway, a little bit of trivia. Well, Robert had a few questions, all of which I don't know the answer to. So I'm going to skip that. Sorry, Robert. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Okay. Ooh, how long is the Torah scroll made? Well, it depends on what you mean. One answer would be the length of the scroll is about 120 feet, but if you're asking how long it takes to write, that's about 1.5 years. So this is going to be a scribe working full time for over 1 year writing the scroll. And there's a little bit of a myth that if they make one mistake, they have to throw away the whole scroll. That's not really true, but there are certain things that can be fixed and certain things that can't. But kind of the worst case scenario would be that one sheet would have to be taken out, and then they would start again on that sheet. So they would lose like maybe a week or two of work. Okay. 4-line break. So that's once again, that's going to be the break between the books. So anytime the break is 4 lines, that's going to be a break between books. There's also, you can have a break within a line or a break where it goes to a new line, which are different divisions between sections. Okay, let's see any more here. price of a scroll. So the bottom, it's going to be about for a new scroll. So if you get a used scroll, maybe you'll get more of a deal. But it's going to be about 45,000 to 120,000, and that's going to be based on just the quality, how skilled the scribe is. Smaller scrolls can actually be more expensive, but yeah, there's a range there. Okay, any other questions? I don't know if I'm missing them here. Let me see. All right, well, I'll turn it back over to Rabbi Seth. If you had a question that I missed, go ahead and send it in again.
Yeah, as you can see from what Ben shared, that a Torah scroll is not inexpensive. Our scrolls are well insured, actually, by, and some may find this amusing, our insurance company is Church Mutual, which is, believe it or not, the largest, last I checked a few years ago, the largest insurer of churches and synagogues in the United States. So they are very well versed in Torah scrolls. Asked us a number of questions about our Torah scrolls. They're accustomed to insuring Torah scrolls. So that was an interesting find and experience. Scroll making locations, yes, yes, all of the above and then some. Robert is asking, where could you have a scroll made? Anywhere you would have a scribe who's up and functioning, but certainly New York, Jerusalem would be centers of scribal activity, as well as other places with large Jewish communities. Sherwin's asking, is there a body that certifies the accuracy and consistency of each scroll?
As far as the accuracy of the scroll, like I said, sofer comes from the word to count, so it's a big emphasis on accuracy. So typically the way this would happen is a sofer would write the cloth, the sheet of parchment, and they would have that checked by another sofer, another scribe. And also these days, they usually take a photograph of the sheet and have it checked by a computer program that kind of flags all the potential errors, and then they go back and check and see whether those are legitimate or not. So it's usually checked at least twice. And as far as making the scroll, I also wanted to mention it doesn't have to be made in a synagogue or a special place. A lot of them work from home and are just in their home office at their desk working on the scroll.
I think I did see a question earlier about if we knew anything more about our particular scrolls. If I'm not mistaken, Robert had asked where in Hungary. Some personal investment I know there in Hungary and the synagogues there. I don't know. We just don't know. We don't know much at all about our scrolls, and that's not uncommon for older scrolls that are acquired in the manner that we acquired ours. Yeah, I know the script looks so clear and consistent, and this is the work of a professional scribe, and that's the way they're trained, and the way it looks, it's beautiful. The material, as Ben shared earlier, it's from the skin of a kosher animal. Can't be a fish. Can't be a fish. Okay. But it's often cattle. You need larger, segments, of course, and they're cured in special ways. Yeah, the long distance view was a little bit different when we were first practicing and not practicing, but preparing. We rolled these out and we thought, wow, this is really beautiful. I would love to do this at a Simchat Torah in the future in person, because it would be wonderful for all of us to be gathered around the scroll and looking as it is unrolled. It's just a different angle and very, very special. Yeah. How much does a scroll weigh? There is a sort of average for each. I don't remember. All I can say is the smaller scroll is much lighter than the larger scroll. And when you're in the book of Genesis or the book of Deuteronomy, depending on which, your left arm or your right arm better be in good shape if you're lifting that large scroll. Are there other scrolls made like books from the prophets or Psalms? Perhaps Haftorah. Yeah.
There, Haftorah scrolls do exist. It depends on the custom of the synagogue. It's not a requirement that a synagogue would have a scroll of the Haftorah, but that's something that exists. There are. It's generally it's a very common custom to read directly from the scroll of Esther, so that's a common one that's made. Also, there's a scroll of Eicha or Lamentations for Tisha B'Av. That particular one, you commonly will see a scroll without a roller on it, just kind of rolled up by hand, and it's a little bit shorter. And as far as the weight of the scrolls, that's also the Etzei Chaim, depending on what they're made of and how decorated they are, that could really affect the weight. Also, the different material between Ashkenazi and some Sephardic scrolls, where it's the thicker leather that's more heavy, but there's a lot of factors.
We actually do have, as a synagogue, we have a scroll of Esther. But it's a heavily damaged scroll. It also was brought from the fires of the European Holocaust, and someone who's actually a collector in a church about 45 minutes from the Triangle donated it to our community, and maybe a year ago looked into having it restored. Which would be a tremendous amount, and was sort of advised that what we may want to do is, have the scroll unrolled and have the whole scroll framed, just sort of as is, and on display. And I don't know it offhand, but the collector did give us more information, at least more than we know about our Torah scrolls. So it could be something that could be, displayed along with what we do know, more as a artifact and piece of art for memory rather than for regular use. So that's something that we've considered. Well, I think that this has been a good time to, again, do something a little bit different. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I hope you learned something. I wish we could be going out dancing. We're not doing that now, but we will be doing that in the future. And I've been asked by a few people if, as is our custom, if there might be a handstand involved in this Simchat Torah observance. And so it's hard. I always say no, and then when I get there, it's very hard to resist. So in this view, you may just see my feet kind of dangling upward, but I'm happy to do a handstand for our finale for our fall holy day season. And here we go. One, let me take my glasses off under my helmet. This way. And here it is. Oh, that's good enough for this year. Moadim l'simcha, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Hashem, for a wonderful fall holy day season as the blood goes back into other parts of my body. May you continue to be with us, and may you continue to watch over us, protect us, sustain us into this new year of 5781. We bless you and we thank you. B'Shem